Hello, and welcome. Tonight, we're going on a journey together. A slow, gentle exploration through time itself. Not the frantic countdown kind of time, but the kind that moves like water, that turns like seasons, that humans have been trying to understand and mark for as long as we've looked up at the stars. This isn't a celebration. There won't be confetti or champagne corks or shouty countdowns. Instead, we're simply going to walk through history and observe how people across thousands of years have tried to capture something ephemeral, the moment when one year ends and another begins. The moment when time, which never really stops, seems to pause just long enough for us to notice it passing. So settle in, get comfortable, let your breathing slow, and as you drift, know that this story we're about to tell has been unfolding for millennia, long before you or I were here, and will continue long after. There's something comforting in that, I think, the steady turning of the year. Let's begin at the beginning, or at least as close to a beginning as we can find.
What exactly is a new year? It sounds like such a simple question, doesn't it? But when you really think about it, the concept is wonderfully strange. The universe doesn't reset. The stars don't rearrange themselves. One moment simply follows another in an endless stream. And yet humans decided we need to mark this. We need to say, here, right here, is where the old ends and the new begins. The new year, at its heart, is just humanity's way of marking the completion of a cycle. One full rotation around the sun, one complete journey through the seasons. It's us, tiny beings on a spinning rock, trying to make sense of an infinite cosmos by breaking it into manageable pieces. Think about ancient peoples, long before clocks or calendars as we know them. They didn't have smartphones buzzing with reminders or desk calendars with numbered squares. They had the sun, they had the moon, they had the slow, reliable march of the seasons. They watched the sun climb higher in the sky each day until it reached its peak, then watched it sink lower again. They saw the moon wax and wane in its endless cycle, full to nothing to full again. These were their clocks. The first new moon after the spring equinox, the day when the sun stood still at its highest point, the summer solstice, the moment when day and night balanced perfectly on the scales of the autumn equinox. These astronomical events weren't just pretty things to look at, they were survival. They told you when to plant seeds, when to harvest, when to prepare for winter's grip, when to expect the rivers to flood and bring life-giving water and silt to your fields. Different cultures, separated by mountains and oceans and deserts, independently came to the same conclusion: we need to mark when these cycles complete. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't all agree on when that completion happened. Some said the year begins in spring, when the world comes back to life after winter's death. It makes sense, doesn't it? The first shoots pushing through cold earth, the first warmth returning to the air, the first birds returning from wherever they'd gone. Spring is rebirth, and what better time for a new year than when nature itself is being reborn? Others pointed to summer, to that longest day when the sun is at its peak power. Still others chose autumn when the harvest came in, the literal fruits of the year's labor, the moment when you knew whether you'd survive the coming winter or not. And some chose winter, the darkest time, the moment when the sun begins its slow return and days start getting longer again. A promise that light will come back, that warmth will return, that death is not permanent. There was no correct answer, just different peoples in different places watching the same sky and coming to different conclusions about when the wheel of the year should reset. This wasn't confusion, it was humanity in all its beautiful diversity, finding meaning in the cosmos. Time, you see, is slippery. We treat it like it's solid, like it's real in the way a rock or a tree is real. But it's not really. It's something we measure, something we name, something we mark. And the way we mark it says less about the universe and more about us, what we value, what we notice, what we need. So when we talk about the first New Year's celebrations, understand that they weren't really first. Somewhere, sometime, probably many times in many places, humans looked up and thought, this moment matters. This moment marks something. Let's remember it. Let's honor it. Let's gather together and acknowledge that we've made it through another cycle of seasons, another journey around the sun. The new year is humanity's way of finding rhythm in chaos, of imposing order on the formless flow of time. And once we started doing that, once we started marking these moments, something remarkable happened. We didn't just observe the passage of time, we began to shape our relationship with it. We began to have traditions, rituals, meaning attached to these arbitrary points we'd marked on the calendar. Now, let's travel back to where we find the earliest written records of such a celebration, to a place where the rivers ran between deserts, where ziggurats rose toward the heavens, where people first learned to write down their stories and preserve them for us to find thousands of years later. Let's go to Babylon.
Imagine, if you will, a city rising from the plains of Mesopotamia around 4,000 years ago. Babylon. The name itself sounds like something from a dream, doesn't it? This was one of humanity's first great civilizations, built along the banks of the Euphrates River in what we now call Iraq. The people of Babylon looked at the sky with intense focus. They were some of the world's first astronomers, tracking the movements of planets and stars, noting patterns, making predictions. And they were farmers, which meant they understood deeply that their lives depended on cycles, the cycle of seasons, of planting and harvest, of floods and drought. Around 2000 BCE, that's roughly 4,000 years ago, a span of time so vast it's hard to truly grasp, the Babylonians held what we believe to be the earliest recorded New Year festival. They called it Akitu. The name comes from an even older Sumerian celebration called Zagmuk, showing us that this tradition had roots going back even further into the mists of prehistory. The Babylonian New Year wasn't celebrated in the dead of winter, as ours is now. No, it took place in the spring, during the month they called Nisanu, roughly corresponding to our March or April. It began with the first new moon after the spring equinox, that moment when day and night are equal length, when winter is definitively over and the world is waking up. And crucially, it aligned with the agricultural cycle. This was the season of barley sowing, the time when seeds went into the ground and the whole cycle of growth began again. The Akitu festival wasn't just a party. It was profound. It lasted not for a single night, but for 11 or 12 days. Imagine dedicating nearly 2 weeks of your life to marking the turn of the year. That tells you something about how seriously they took this. Let me walk you through what happened during those days, as best as historians have pieced it together from ancient texts and temple inscriptions. On the first day, the priests would rise before dawn. In the great temple called Isagila, the house of Marduk, Babylon's supreme god, they would begin reciting prayers. But these weren't joyful prayers, they were lamentations, expressions of fear and unworthiness. The priests would say things like, "Lord, without peer in thy wrath, Lord, gracious King, Lord of the lands, who made salvation for the great gods." They were acknowledging human frailty before the divine powers that controlled their fate. On the second day, the high priest would purify himself by bathing in the Euphrates River. Picture this. Before dawn, the priest walking down to the dark waters, the city still mostly asleep, the first light just beginning to touch the tops of the ziggurats. He immerses himself, ritually washing away impurities, preparing himself to mediate between the human and divine realms. The fourth day was when things really began to build. The high priest would recite the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. This wasn't just entertainment, it was sacred mythology that explained how the world came to be. The story told of Marduk's victory over Tiamat, the primordial chaos monster, how he split her body to create the heavens and earth, how he brought order from chaos. By reciting this story, the Babylonians believed they were symbolically recreating the world, renewing it for another year. But here's where it gets really fascinating, and a bit uncomfortable by our standards. On the fifth day, the king himself was required to participate in a ritual that seems designed to humble him absolutely. The king would enter the temple. The high priest would strip him of all his royal regalia, his crown, his scepter, his ornate robes. Everything that marked him as king was taken away. Then, standing there in simple clothes, probably feeling quite vulnerable, the king would swear an oath before the statue of Marduk. He would declare that he had ruled wisely and justly, that he had not sinned against the god, that he had protected the city. And then, and this is the part that really makes you understand how different this culture was, the high priest would strike the king. Multiple sources describe the priest slapping the king across the face and pulling him by his ears until tears came to his eyes. The king wasn't supposed to resist, he was supposed to weep. Why? Because his tears were considered a sign that Marduk approved of his rule. Tears meant rain, meant the floods would come, meant the crops would grow. The king's ritual humiliation was tied directly to the fertility and prosperity of the land. No king stood above the gods. No king was beyond reproach or accountability. After this ordeal, his regalia would be returned to him, and he could resume being king. But the message was clear: your power comes from the gods, not from yourself. Meanwhile, something else was happening. The statue of Nabu, god of writing and wisdom, son of Marduk, was being brought in procession from the city of Borsippa, about 17 kilometers away. Other gods were arriving too, their cult statues carried carefully by priests. It was like a parliament of the gods was convening in Babylon. On the 8th day, all these divine statues would be brought out of the temple into the light for all the people to see. Thousands of Babylonians would line the streets as the procession moved through the city. Can you picture it? The slow, ceremonial pace, the chanting, the incense smoke curling up into the desert air, the weight of thousands of years of tradition in every step. The procession would make its way out of the city to a special building called the Bit Akitu, the Akitu House, built near the river in the fields outside the city walls. This was a liminal space, neither fully in the city nor fully in the wild, a place between, which made it perfect for sacred rituals. Here, further ceremonies would take place. Water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, considered sacred, would be used in purification rituals. The gods, through their statues, would announce their policy for the coming year. According to records, this policy was always one of blessing and fortune. Imagine the relief the gathered crowd must have felt hearing that the gods had decided to favor them for another year. Then there would be feasting, music, probably dancing, though the records are less clear on that. The strict formality of the early days would give way to genuine celebration. They had ritually died and been reborn. The world had been unmade and remade. The king had been stripped down and built back up. The cycle was complete. On the 11th and final day, there was a ceremony called the Festival of the Great Release. Prisoners were freed, deaths were forgiven, the slate was wiped clean. It was a literal fresh start, not just symbolic.
Imagine the mixture of relief and joy for someone whose debt was suddenly gone or who was unexpectedly freed from imprisonment. The new year wasn't just a date on a calendar, it had real, tangible effects on people's lives. The Akitu festival reveals something profound about how these ancient people understood time and existence. They didn't see the year as something that simply happened automatically. They believed it needed to be recreated, renewed through ritual. The world was always threatening to slide back into chaos.
11 days of rituals, processions, prayers, humiliations, celebrations. But in a way, there's something beautiful about taking that much time to mark the passage of a year, to really, truly acknowledge that something has ended and something new is beginning. The Akitu festival continued for thousands of years, long after Babylon fell, long after the Assyrians adopted it, long after the Persians conquered the region. People kept celebrating it. Even under Roman rule, as late as the 3rd century CE, the festival was still being observed in some places. It was held in the city of Emesa in Syria, and the Roman Emperor Elagabalus, who had Syrian heritage, even tried to introduce it in Italy. Today, the Assyrian people still celebrate Akitu, usually on April 1st, though in a much different form, one day instead of 11, with parades and traditional dress, more about cultural identity than religious ritual. But the thread stretches back, unbroken, to those first Babylonians watching the spring moon rise over their ziggurat, knowing that soon they would sow their barley and hoping the gods would bless the harvest to come. Babylon gave us the first written evidence of humans saying, "Here, this moment, this is when we begin again." But they weren't alone in this impulse. If we travel west from Babylon, across deserts and through what is now Syria and Lebanon, we eventually reach another of humanity's great cradles of civilization, Egypt, the land of pyramids and pharaohs, of elaborate tombs and hieroglyphic mysteries. And the Egyptians, like the Babylonians, had their own way of marking the new year, one tied intimately to their lifeblood, the Nile River. The Egyptian New Year's celebration was called Wepet Renpet, which translates beautifully as the opening of the year. If Babylon's New Year was about the chaos of spring planting, Egypt's was about something even more dramatic, the annual flooding of the Nile. Let me help you understand how crucial this was. Egypt is essentially a desert with a river running through it. Without the Nile, it would be uninhabitable, just sand and rock and scorching sun. But every year, like clockwork, the Nile would rise. Waters from distant Ethiopian highlands, from seasonal rains far to the south, would gradually work their way north, and the river would swell until it burst its banks and spread across the floodplains. This wasn't a disaster, this was salvation. The floodwaters brought silt, rich, black, fertile silt full of minerals and nutrients. When the waters receded, they left behind this dark earth, and in that earth, crops would grow abundantly. The Egyptians called their country Kemet, which means black land, after this precious dark soil. Everything else was Deshret, red land, the desert, the death land, the place where nothing grew. The flooding typically occurred around mid-July by our modern calendar, and the Egyptians could see it coming because of a celestial event, the heliacal rising of Sirius. Let me explain what that means because it's beautiful. Sirius is the brightest star in the night sky. For about 70 days each year, Sirius disappears from view, lost in the sun's glare, as Earth's orbit carries us to a position where Sirius rises during daylight when we can't see it. Then, on one morning, just before dawn, Sirius reappears, rising in the east just moments before the sun does, a brilliant point of light in the pre-dawn darkness. The Egyptians called Sirius Sopdet, and they watched for its return with intense anticipation, because when Sopdet rose, the Nile's flood was about to begin. It was so reliable that they based their entire calendar around it. This was their New Year's Day, not an arbitrary choice, but one dictated by the heavens and confirmed by the life-giving river. The celebration of Wepet Renpet was joyful, though we don't have quite as detailed records of it as we do for Babylon's Akitu. What we do know is that it involved taking statues of the gods out of their temples and into the sunlight. The Egyptians believed the sun's rays would regenerate the statues, renewing the divine power within them for another year. Some statues would even be replaced with new ones during this festival, the old ones carefully stored away. There would be feasting. Tomb paintings show elaborate banquet scenes from New Year's celebrations, tables laden with food, people in their finest clothes, musicians playing, dancers moving. One temple, the Temple of Mut, has evidence of something called the Festival of Drunkenness, held during the New Year period. The Egyptians connected this to the myth of Sekhmet, a war goddess who once planned to destroy humanity until the sun god Ra tricked her into drinking red beer, which she thought was blood, making her so drunk she forgot her murderous intentions and became peaceful. So yes, ritual intoxication was apparently part of the program, though whether this was religious devotion or just humans being humans and wanting a reason to party is open to interpretation. The Egyptians also exchanged gifts during Wepet Renpet, special flasks, often made of faience, a kind of glazed ceramic, and they seemed to hold scented oils rather than alcohol. Archaeologists have found many of these, including one beautiful example in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City that dates to around 600 BCE. It asks the gods Montu and Amun-Re to grant a priest named Amenhotep a prosperous new year. Here's something interesting about the Egyptian calendar. It didn't have leap years. It was exactly 365 days, every year. This meant it gradually shifted relative to the actual solar year. So while Wepet Renpet started out around the summer solstice, when the calendar was first created about 4,800 years ago, by the time of the Middle Kingdom, around 2030 to 1640 BCE, it had drifted all the way to the winter solstice in December. Even stranger, there's evidence that at some points in Egyptian history, they celebrated the New Year multiple times in a single year. A calendar at the Temple of Khnum at Esna shows 3 separate Wepet Renpet festivals marked within 1 year, one aligned with the Egyptian calendar date, one celebrating the Roman emperor's birthday, since Egypt was under Roman rule at that time, and one marking the actual heliacal rising of Sirius. It's as if they couldn't quite decide, so they celebrated all of them, which honestly sounds rather lovely. Why have one new year when you could have 3? But Egypt and Babylon weren't the only ancient civilizations marking the turn of the year. Let me take you on a quick tour of a few others. In ancient Persia, there was Nowruz, which means new day. It's celebrated on the spring equinox and may date back as far as 6,000 years to the early Zoroastrian religion, though the first clear records appear around the 6th century BCE under the Achaemenid Empire. Nowruz has survived everything: Alexander the Great's conquest, the Islamic conquest, countless wars and regime changes. Today, it's still celebrated across Iran and Central Asia, a testament to its deep cultural roots. The tradition involved spring cleaning, new clothes, feasts, visiting family, lighting bonfires, dyeing eggs, and sprinkling water to symbolize creation and renewal. In China, the Lunar New Year, also called Spring Festival, dates back at least 3,500 years to the Shang dynasty.
It's based on a lunar calendar occurring on the second new moon after the winter solstice, which puts it somewhere in late January or early February. The traditions include thoroughly cleaning your house to sweep out bad luck, repaying debts to start fresh, decorating with red paper. Red wards off evil spirits, and after gunpowder was invented around the 10th century CE, setting off fireworks. The noise of fireworks was originally meant to scare away a mythical beast called Neon, who supposedly came to devour people as each year ended. Each of these celebrations shared common themes, even though the cultures developed independently. There was always an element of purification, cleaning, bathing, ritualistic washing away of the old year's impurities. There was renewal, symbolically starting fresh, whether through forgiving debts, releasing prisoners, or just wearing new clothes. There was acknowledgement of the divine, making offerings, saying prayers, performing rituals to ensure the gods' favor. And there was community, gathering together, sharing food, celebrating as a group rather than alone. These patterns repeat across human cultures because they tap into something fundamental in how we experience time and meaning. The new year isn't just a date flipping over. It's a moment to pause and reflect, to let go and begin again, to connect with something larger than our individual selves, whether that's the divine, nature, our community, or just the vast sweep of human history that came before us and will continue after us. But while these civilizations were developing their various New Year celebrations, one culture was slowly building an empire that would eventually spread its calendar and its New Year across much of the known world. That culture was Rome.
The Roman calendar has a complicated history, full of political manipulation, mathematical miscalculations, and fascinating glimpses into how humans struggled to align their artificial systems with nature's rhythms. It's the reason our months no longer match their names. September, from septem, meaning 7, is actually the 9th month. October, from octo, meaning 8, is the 10th. Something clearly went awry at some point. Let's start at the traditional beginning, though keep in mind that much of what Romans believed about their early history was legend as much as fact. According to tradition, Rome's first king, Romulus, established a calendar that had only 10 months. It started with March and ended with December, leaving a chunk of winter completely uncounted. Whether this actually happened or was just a mythical explanation for irregularities in the later calendar, we're not entirely sure. The calendar was then supposedly reformed by Numa Pompilius, Rome's second king, who ruled around 715 to 673 BCE. Numa, the story goes, added 2 new months to account for that missing winter period: January, Januarius, and February, Februarius. At first, these were placed at the end of the year, making December still technically the 10th month, as its name suggested. Only later, around 452 BCE, was February moved to its current position between January and March. But here's where it gets interesting. Numa supposedly made January the first month of the year from the beginning. He named it after Janus, a god unique to Roman religion. Janus is depicted with 2 faces, one looking forward and one looking back. He was the god of doorways, transitions, beginnings, and endings. What better deity to preside over the turning of the year than one who simultaneously looks at where you've been and where you're going? You can still see Janus's image in Rome today, carved above doorways on ancient buildings and temples. He watches both ways, into the house and out of it, into the past and into the future. There's something deeply appropriate about him being associated with January. However, and this is where Roman history gets messy, it appears that for several centuries, despite January being the first month of the calendar, the new year didn't actually officially begin on January 1st in Rome. The consul's term, which was how Romans often marked time, you'd say, in the year when Brutus and Cassius were consuls, began in March. The agricultural cycle began in March. Spring began in March. So even though January was technically month number 1, March remained the functional start of the year for many purposes. This changed in 153 BCE. Rome was dealing with a rebellion in Hispania, modern-day Spain and Portugal. The historian Livy tells us that the Senate decided the new consuls needed to take office earlier than usual so they could address this military crisis. So, they moved the official start of the consular year from the Ides of March, March 15th, to the calends of January, January 1st. This wasn't presented as a calendar reform so much as administrative necessity, but it stuck. From 153 BCE onward, January 1st was when new consuls took office, which made it the de facto start of the Roman official year. The civil year and the calendar year were now aligned. But the Roman calendar was still a mess. It was based on the lunar cycle, 355 days, which meant it was about 10¼ days shorter than the solar year. To fix this, the College of Pontiffs, a group of priests who oversaw religious matters, including the calendar, would occasionally insert an extra month called Mercedonius, sometimes 22 or 23 days long. This intercalary month would be slipped in after February 23rd, with the last few days of February moved to the end of it. In theory, this should have kept everything aligned. In practice, it was a disaster. The College of Pontiffs was political, and they would manipulate the calendar for political advantage. If they liked someone in office, they might add extra days to extend their term. If they disliked someone, they might skip the intercalary month entirely, shortening the year and cutting the person's time in power. Sometimes they'd add or subtract days to rush legislation through or delay it. By Caesar's time, the calendar was completely out of sync with the seasons. The harvest festivals were happening before the crops were even ripe. The calendar said one season, but nature was doing something completely different. The situation had become absurd. Caesar, who had been serving as Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, since 63 BCE, had been aware of the problem for years, but he'd been busy conquering Gaul and then fighting a civil war with Pompey in the Senate. It wasn't until he emerged victorious and became dictator in 46 BCE that he had the power and opportunity to fix things. He did so in spectacular fashion. Caesar consulted with Sosigenes, an astronomer from Alexandria in Egypt. The Egyptians had long used a solar calendar of 365 days, and they understood the mathematics of it better than the Romans did. Sosigenes advised abandoning the lunar calendar entirely and switching to a solar one. The new system was elegant, a calendar of 365 days divided into 12 months with one extra day added to February every 4 years, what we call leap years, to account for the fact that the solar year is actually 365.25 days. But first, they had to fix the accumulated error. The calendar was a full 3 months out of alignment with the seasons. So Caesar declared that the year 46 BCE would be 445 days long, 15 months instead of 12. Historians call it Ultimus Annus Confusionis, the last year of confusion. That must have been a strange year to live through. When does this year end? Eventually, keep waiting. On January 1st, 45 BCE, the new calendar took effect. January 1st was confirmed as New Year's Day in the Julian calendar, named after Julius Caesar, though it only received that name after his death. This calendar would, with minor modifications, spread across the Roman Empire and eventually become the basis for the calendar most of the world uses today. It's worth pausing to appreciate how arbitrary yet consequential this was. Julius Caesar, for essentially political and practical reasons, decided that January 1st would be the new year. Not because of astronomy, the winter solstice had already passed by then, not because of agriculture, nothing important happens in farming in early January,
not because of any particular religious significance, but because January came first numerically, and because that's when consuls took office. And yet, this decision made by one man in one city 2,000 years ago is why most people reading this consider January 1st to be the start of the year. That's the power of empire. Rome's choices became everyone's choices eventually. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, on March 15th, the Ides of March, the old start of the year, which seems symbolically fitting, the month Quintilis was renamed Julius in his honor. Later, after Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, became Augustus, the month Sextilis was renamed Augustus. That's why we have July and August today. The Julian calendar was a huge improvement over what came before, but it wasn't perfect. Sosigenes had calculated the solar year as exactly 365.25 days. The actual solar year is about 365.2429 days, about 11 minutes shorter than Sosigenes thought. That doesn't sound like much, but 11 minutes per year adds up. By the 1500s, the Julian calendar had drifted about 10 days off from the solar year. This became a problem for the Catholic Church because Easter is calculated based on the spring equinox, and the equinox was happening on March 10th according to the calendar, even though it had been on March 21st when the Council of Nicaea established the Easter calculation in 325 CE. The whole liturgical year was getting progressively more out of sync with the seasons. But that fix wouldn't come for much later. For now, Rome had established January 1st as the new year, and as Roman power spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, so did this calendar and this date. However, Rome's power didn't last forever, and when it fell, the calendar situation became confused all over again.
When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century CE, it took a lot of certainty with it. The roads that had connected the empire fell into disrepair, trade networks fractured, cities shrank, knowledge was lost, and the calendar, which had been relatively standardized across the Roman world, became fragmented and confusing again. Christianity was spreading across Europe, and the Church was becoming the dominant institutional force in what we now call the Middle Ages. Christian leaders looked at the pagan associations of January 1st, with its celebrations of Janus, its tradition of revelry and excess, and they weren't entirely comfortable with it. Different regions began celebrating the new year on different dates, usually ones that had Christian significance. Some places celebrated it on December 25th, Christmas Day, the birth of Christ. This had a certain logic to it. Christ's birth was a new beginning for humanity, so why not start the year there? Others celebrated on March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation. This commemorates when the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary to tell her she would give birth to Jesus. In medieval Christian thought, this was considered the moment of Christ's conception, and conception is the truest beginning of life, isn't it? So March 25th became the new year for many Christian lands. England used March 25th as its official New Year's Day for centuries. Legal documents would be dated accordingly, which creates all sorts of confusion for historians. An event that happened in January would be dated as being in the previous year because officially the year hadn't started yet. Shakespeare's birthday is often given as April 23rd, 1564, but in Shakespeare's own time, that date would have been written as 1563 because the year 1564 hadn't begun yet. It wouldn't start until March 25th. Some places used Easter as the start of the year, though this created its own problems, since Easter moves around based on the lunar cycle. Imagine trying to maintain any kind of historical record or legal system when the year's length changes dramatically year to year depending on when Easter falls. Venice used March 1st. Russia used September 1st.
Different Christian denominations and different kingdoms had different preferences, and when they interacted, when they signed treaties or arranged marriages or traded goods, they had to carefully specify which calendar they were using. It was a mess. But while all this confusion was happening in Christendom, Islamic civilizations were developing their own sophisticated calendar. The Islamic calendar is purely lunar, with 12 months that total 354 or 355 days. This means it shifts backward relative to the solar year by about 11 days every year. The Islamic New Year, the first day of Muharram, moves through all the seasons over a cycle of about 33 years. There's something interesting about a calendar that isn't tied to agricultural seasons, that treats all times of year as equal. And in other parts of the world, other civilizations continued with their own calendars and New Year's celebrations, largely unaffected by European confusion. The Mayan calendar, the Hindu calendars, various East Asian lunar calendars, time was being measured and marked in dozens of different ways, with dozens of different New Year's days happening at dozens of different times. By the 16th century, the problems with the Julian calendar could no longer be ignored. The spring equinox had drifted to March 10th, 10 days off from where it was supposed to be. This was causing serious problems for calculating Easter and all the other religious festivals that depended on it. Pope Gregory XIII decided something had to be done. In 1582, he issued a papal bull called Inter Gravissimus, in the gravest concerns, that reformed the calendar. The Gregorian calendar, as it came to be known, made a small but crucial adjustment to the Julian calendar's leap year system. Instead of adding a leap day every 4 years without exception, the Gregorian calendar said years divisible by 4 are leap years except for years divisible by 100, which are not leap years, except for years divisible by 400, which are leap years. So 1600 and 2000 were leap years, but 1700, 1800, and 1900 were not. This might seem complicated, but it's brilliantly accurate. It brings the calendar year to an average of 365.2425 days, which is extremely close to the actual solar year of 365.242119. Under the Gregorian calendar, the error is only 1 day every 3,236 years. That's pretty good. To implement the calendar, Gregory had to delete 10 days to get everything back in sync. October 4th, 1582, was followed immediately by October 15th, 1582. 10 days just didn't happen. Imagine going to bed on Thursday night and waking up to find it was Friday 2 weeks later. And crucially, Gregory reconfirmed that January 1st was the start of the year. But here's the thing, the Gregorian calendar was issued by the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church. Protestant countries looked at this reform with suspicion. Were they really going to accept a calendar just because the Pope said so? Many didn't, not at first. Catholic countries like Spain, Portugal, and Italy adopted it immediately in 1582, but Protestant England held out until 1752, 170 years later. By then, the Julian calendar England was still using was 11 days off, so when they finally switched, September 2nd, 1752 was followed by September 14th, 1752. 11 days vanished. This caused actual riots. People were convinced they'd been cheated out of 11 days of their lives. There were protests demanding, "Give us back our 11 days." Some people thought their souls were in danger because saints' feast days had been moved. Some worried their rent was being calculated unfairly. Russia held out even longer, not adopting the Gregorian calendar until after the Russian Revolution in 1918. This is why the October Revolution actually happened in November by the Gregorian calendar. Greece was the last European country to adopt it, not switching until 1923. So for centuries, different parts of Europe were literally living in different years. When it was January 1st, 1700 in France, which had adopted the Gregorian calendar, it was still 1699 in England, which hadn't. International relations required constant mental gymnastics to figure out what date anything actually happened. But gradually, slowly, the Gregorian calendar spread, not because it was Catholic, but because it was accurate, and because standardization made trade and diplomacy easier. Colonial powers brought it to their colonies. Independent nations adopted it to facilitate international relations. By the 20th century, it had become the de facto global standard. Which is why today, despite the incredible diversity of human cultures, despite thousands of different languages and religions and customs, January 1st is recognized as the new year in most official contexts worldwide. Not because it's the right date cosmically, but because we all agreed, gradually, sometimes reluctantly, to use the same calendars so we could coordinate with each other. Of course, many cultures maintain their traditional calendars alongside the Gregorian one. The Chinese Lunar New Year, the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, the Islamic Muharram, the Hindu Diwali, the Buddhist New Year, the Ethiopian Enkutatah, and dozens of others are still celebrated. The Gregorian calendar didn't erase these, it just added a layer of global standardization for practical purposes. But with the calendar finally settled, a new question emerged. Now that we all agree on when the new year happens, how should we celebrate it?
As we move from the history of calendars into the history of celebrations, the mood shifts. We move from kings and popes and astronomical calculations into something more intimate, the rituals that ordinary people develop to mark this moment of transition. Let's start in Spain with one of the world's most charming New Year's traditions, the 12 grapes. On New Year's Eve in Spain, as midnight approaches, people gather. Some are at home with family, some are in restaurants, and some, hundreds of thousands of them, crowd into public squares across the country, most famously in Madrid's Puerta del Sol, where the clock tower of the Casa de Correos overlooks the plaza. Everyone has 12 grapes, exactly 12. You can buy them pre-packaged at supermarkets, already counted out. The seedless ones are popular because you're about to understand why that matters. At midnight, the bells begin to chime. 12 chimes, marking the 12 final seconds of the old year. And with each chime, you must eat one grape. Bong, grape. Bong, grape. Bong, grape. 12 chimes, 12 grapes, 12 seconds. If you manage to eat all 12 grapes before the final bell finishes ringing, you'll have good luck for all 12 months of the coming year. Each grape represents 1 month. Miss one, and that month might be unlucky. It sounds simple. It's not. Try eating 12 grapes in 12 seconds. Some people cheat and peel them or remove the seeds ahead of time. Some people use very small grapes. Some people end up with grape juice running down their chin, desperately trying to chew and swallow fast enough. There's usually laughter, some mild choking, frantic chewing, and a mixture of joy and panic. Where did this tradition come from? Like many traditions, its origins are a bit murky and probably have multiple sources. One story says it began in Madrid, upper class, in the 1880s. Wealthy families, inspired by French customs, started celebrating New Year's Eve with champagne and grapes. This annoyed the common people, who felt excluded from public celebrations. So, in an act of humorous rebellion, working-class madrileños started gathering at the Puerta del Sol on New Year's Eve and eating grapes along with the bell chimes, mocking the aristocratic tradition by democratizing it. Another story says in 1909, grape growers in Alicante had an exceptional harvest, too many grapes, more than they could sell. Someone had the clever marketing idea to package 12 grapes together and promote them as lucky grapes for New Year's. It was basically an early advertising campaign, and it worked brilliantly. A third theory suggests it was a bit of both, an existing aristocratic custom that got a commercial boost from surplus grapes and turned into a national tradition.
Whatever the truth, by the mid-20th century, the 12 grapes had become deeply embedded in Spanish culture. Today, it's broadcast on national television, with the camera focusing on the Puerta del Sol clock as it strikes midnight. Millions of Spaniards watch from home, grapes ready, preparing for their annual race against the clock. And the tradition has spread. Throughout Latin America, in Mexico, Venezuela, Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador, people eat 12 grapes at midnight. The Philippines, with its Spanish colonial history, does it too. Even some Spanish-speaking communities in the United States have adopted the custom. There are modern variations. Some people eat the grapes under the table if they're single, believing it will help them find love in the new year. This seems to be a recent addition, possibly spread through social media like TikTok, but it shows how traditions continue to evolve and adapt. Let's jump around the world and look at other traditions. In Denmark, people save their old dishes and crockery all year, specifically so they can smash them against friends' doors on New Year's Eve. The bigger the pile of broken pottery on your doorstep, the more popular you are, the more friends you have. It's a strange but oddly satisfying way to express affection. The Danes also have a tradition of jumping off chairs at midnight. As the clock strikes 12, you stand on a chair, and at the moment the new year arrives, you leap off, jumping into the new year. It's playful and literal and completely charming. In Scotland, New Year's Eve is called Hogmanay, and it's taken very seriously, perhaps more seriously than Christmas. The tradition of first footing says that the first person to enter your house after midnight brings the luck for your household for the coming year. Ideally, the first footer should be a tall, dark-haired man carrying symbolic gifts: coal for warmth, shortbread for food, salt for flavor, whiskey for good cheer, and a black bun, a type of fruitcake. Why a tall, dark-haired man? The tradition supposedly dates back to the Viking ages. A blonde stranger at your door meant Viking raiders, which was bad news. A dark-haired stranger was more likely to be a local, which was good news. So even centuries after the Viking Age ended, the superstition persisted. In Japan, temples ring their bells 108 times at midnight, a practice called Joya no Kane. The number 108 represents the 108 human desires or worldly passions described in Buddhist teaching, things like greed, anger, jealousy, obsession. Each bell toll purifies one desire, cleansing you for the new year. It's meditative, contemplative, the opposite of a raucous party. You stand in the cold winter air, listening to the deep, resonant tones of the bell echoing across the temple grounds, and you let go. In Brazil, millions of people dress in white and gather on beaches, especially the famous Copacabana beach in Rio de Janeiro. At midnight, they jump over 7 waves, 7 for luck, and throw white flowers into the ocean as offerings to Iemanjá, the goddess of the sea. The waves are supposed to take your offerings out. If they return to shore, Iemanjá rejected them, which is bad luck. It's a beautiful fusion of African religious traditions brought by enslaved Africans, Catholicism, and indigenous beliefs. In the Philippines, people wear clothing with polka dots on New Year's Eve because circles represent coins and coins represent wealth. The rounder, the better. Some people carry coins in their pockets, jingling them at midnight. Some jump at midnight, trying to reach as high as possible, believing it will make them taller in the coming year. They also have a tradition of making noise at midnight, banging pots and pans, honking car horns, setting off fireworks to drive away evil spirits and welcome the new year with enthusiasm. The louder, the better. In Estonia, people eat 7, 9, or 12 times on New Year's Eve, depending on which tradition you follow. The number must be lucky, and you're not supposed to finish your meals completely. Leave some food on the plate. This is meant to ensure abundance in the new year. If you start the year well-fed, you'll stay well-fed. In Turkey, people sprinkle salt on their doorsteps at midnight. Salt brings good luck and prosperity. The practice connects to salt's historical value. It was once so precious it was used as currency, which is where we get the word salary. In Greece, an onion is hung on the door on New Year's Eve. Onions symbolize rebirth and growth. It's one of the first plants to bloom in spring. Parents also wake their children on New Year's morning by tapping them on the head with the onion, which is supposed to bring good luck. In Colombia, Ecuador, and parts of Central America, people make life-size dolls representing the old year, usually satirical figures representing unpopular politicians or celebrities, or just symbolic figures representing the year's troubles. These dolls are stuffed with firecrackers. At midnight, they're set on fire and explode, destroying the old year and all its problems symbolically. Some people write their regrets or bad memories on paper and stuff them inside the doll before burning it. In Romania, people dress up in bear skins and dance. The tradition, called ursul or bear dance, has pre-Christian roots. The bear was a powerful symbol, and people believed that by dressing as a bear and dancing, they could drive away evil spirits and bring good fortune. Today, it's more folkloric than genuinely believed, but it's still practiced in rural areas with elaborate costumes and traditional music. In South Africa, some people throw old furniture out of windows, especially in Johannesburg. This is supposedly to get rid of the old and make room for the new, though it's also undoubtedly influenced by similar practices in other cultures. It's been discouraged for safety reasons, but the tradition lingers. In Russia, there's a tradition of writing a wish on a piece of paper, burning it, dropping the ashes into champagne, and drinking the champagne before the clock finishes striking. If you do this correctly, your wish will come true. Imagine the coordination required: writing, burning, ashing, drinking, all in about 60 seconds while people around you are celebrating. Many countries have traditions involving water. In Puerto Rico, people throw buckets of water out of windows at midnight, symbolically cleaning away the old year.
In some parts of Latin America, people run around the block carrying empty suitcases, hoping to ensure travel in the coming year. Color symbolism appears in many traditions. Red underwear in Italy, worn for luck in love and prosperity. Yellow underwear in many Latin American countries for happiness and gold. White in Brazil for peace and new beginnings. Green for health. Purple for transformation. Pink for love. People carefully choose their New Year's underwear color based on what they want from the year ahead. What's striking about all these traditions is their wonderful specificity. Not just celebrate New Year's, but eat exactly 12 grapes in exactly 12 seconds. Not just make noise, but ring a bell exactly 108 times. Not just clean your house, but throw your old furniture out the window. These specific rituals give people something to do with the strange, liminal moment of midnight on New Year's Eve. Midnight is always a bit eerie. The day that's ending and the day that's beginning occupy the same moment. It's a thin place, a threshold. The rituals help us navigate it, give us actions to perform, transform abstract time into concrete experience. And underneath all the diversity, grapes or onions, jumping or burning, salt or champagne, there are common threads: the desire to purify and start fresh, the hope for prosperity, the wish to connect with others, the acknowledgement that time is passing and we want to mark its passage deliberately, meaningfully, together. These traditions aren't ancient, mostly. Many of them are only a century or two old, and they're still evolving. New traditions emerge, taking selfies at midnight, live streaming celebrations, gathering in virtual spaces. Old traditions adapt, switching from smashing dishes to smashing expectations, from jumping into the new year to jumping into new opportunities. The new year is a living tradition, shaped by each generation, each culture, each family, each individual.
And perhaps that's the most important thing to understand. Traditions aren't fossils, preserved unchanged from ancient times. They're living practices, constantly being reinterpreted and reformed to fit contemporary needs and values.
Now we come to some of the New Year's traditions that might feel most familiar, at least to those of us in Western cultures. Things like New Year's resolutions, the song Auld Lang Syne, and the ball drop in Times Square. These feel modern, but each has deeper roots than you might expect. Let's start with resolutions. Making promises to improve yourself at the start of a new year feels like a contemporary practice, doesn't it? Something tied to modern goal-setting culture, to the self-help industry, to gym memberships and diet plans. But the impulse is ancient. Remember the Babylonian Akitu festival? During those 11 days, ordinary people would make promises to the gods, promises to pay back debts, return borrowed tools, behave better as citizens. These weren't casual, I'll try to exercise more promises. They were serious vows with spiritual weight. If you broke these promises, you weren't just disappointing yourself, you were potentially angering the gods. The Babylonians believed that how you started the year set the tone for the entire year ahead, so they tried to start right, settling debts, resolving conflicts, committing to positive changes. This idea traveled through history in various forms. In medieval times, knights would renew their vows of chivalry at the year's end. Roman citizens would make offerings to Janus, the two-faced god of transitions, and make promises for the year ahead. The modern form of New Year's resolutions, as personal self-improvement goals rather than religious vows, really took off in the 19th and 20th centuries as Western culture became more individualistic and more focused on self-development. The resolution became less about communal or divine approval and more about personal betterment. Today, the most common resolutions in surveys are predictable: lose weight, exercise more, save money, quit smoking, learn something new, eat healthier, spend more time with family. These are good goals, worthy goals, but the statistics on keeping resolutions are dismal. Studies suggest that only about 8 to 12% of people actually achieve their New Year's resolutions. Why do we keep making them then, if we usually fail? Maybe because the act of resolving itself has value. The moment of intention, of saying, I want to change, even if the change doesn't happen, is still meaningful. It's an acknowledgement that we're not fixed, that we can grow, that the new year represents possibility. There's also something poignant about the annual cycle of resolution and failure. Every January 1st, gym memberships spike. By February, attendance drops dramatically. It happens so reliably that gyms actually count on it in their business models. They sell more memberships than they could possibly accommodate if everyone actually showed up, because they know most people will stop coming within weeks. But this pattern of hopeful beginning and gradual slippage back to old habits isn't failure exactly, it's human. Change is hard, habits are sticky, and maybe the point isn't to perfectly achieve every resolution. Maybe the point is to keep trying, to keep believing change is possible, to greet each new year with hope rather than cynicism. Now, let's talk about a song that almost everyone recognizes, even if they don't know all the words: Auld Lang Syne. If you've ever been to a New Year's Eve gathering, you've probably heard this song as midnight passes. People link arms in a circle, swaying, singing words they mostly don't understand. It's become the unofficial anthem of New Year's Eve in English-speaking countries and beyond. Auld Lang Syne is Scottish, both in origin and language. The title roughly translates to Old Long Since, or more loosely, Days Gone By, or Times Long Past. The lyrics ask, should old acquaintances be forgotten and never brought to mind? Should we let the memories of friends and days gone by fade away? The answer is no. We should drink a toast to the past, to friendship, to Auld Lang Syne. The most well-known version of the song comes from Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet, who transcribed it in 1788. But Burns didn't write it, he found it.
He heard an old man singing it and wrote down the words, preserving what was probably an ancient folk song that had been passed down orally for generations. How did a Scottish folk song become the song of New Year's Eve worldwide? The answer involves several strands of history weaving together. First, Auld Lang Syne was already associated with farewells in Scotland. It was sung at the end of gatherings, at partings, at the closing of chapters. So it was natural to sing it at year's end, the ultimate parting, the ultimate closing of a chapter. Second, Scottish immigrants spread across the world during the 18th and 19th centuries, bringing their customs with them. Wherever Scots settled, North America, Australia, New Zealand, parts of Asia and Africa, they brought Auld Lang Syne. Third, the song got a huge boost from Guy Lombardo, a Canadian band leader who became famous for his New Year's Eve broadcasts from New York's Roosevelt Hotel and later the Waldorf Astoria, starting in 1929. Lombardo's orchestra played Auld Lang Syne at midnight every year for nearly 5 decades. The broadcasts reached millions of Americans via radio and later television. An entire generation, multiple generations, grew up hearing that song at midnight on New Year's Eve. By the time Lombardo stopped broadcasting in 1976, he died in 1977, the connection between Auld Lang Syne and New Year's Eve was so deeply embedded in American culture that it felt timeless, even though it had been actively constructed and popularized within living memory. The song also has an interesting quality that makes it perfect for the moment. It's reflective and nostalgic rather than celebratory and forward-looking. Most of the new year is about looking ahead, resolutions, fresh starts, new beginnings, but Auld Lang Syne makes us look back. Should old acquaintances be forgot? No, we should remember. We should honor what came before, even as we move forward. There's a bittersweet quality to singing it. You're celebrating the new year, but you're also mourning the old one. You're thinking about friends who aren't there anymore, times that can't come back, experiences that are now just memories. It's the perfect song for a liminal moment, capturing both the joy of continuation and the melancholy of endings. Now let's talk about Times Square, the ball drop. If you've seen any New Year's Eve celebration broadcast, you've seen it. A glittering crystal sphere descending a pole atop one Times Square in New York City as crowds count down the final seconds of the year. It's become the definitive image of New Year's Eve, broadcast to 1 billion people worldwide. But where did this tradition come from? Let's tell the story. In 1903, the New York Times newspaper was about to move into a new headquarters building. The building was magnificent. At the time, it was the second tallest building in New York City. The newspaper owner, Adolph Ochs, wanted to draw attention to it and to the surrounding area, which had recently been renamed Times Square in honor of the newspaper. Ochs organized a massive party for New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1903. There were fireworks set off from the top of the building, and hundreds of thousands of people gathered in the streets below to watch.
It was a spectacular success. Times Square instantly became the place in New York to celebrate New Year's. For 3 more years, Ochs hosted fireworks displays. But in 1907, the city banned fireworks in Manhattan, worried about the fire risk and the hot ash raining down on crowds. Ochs needed a new spectacle to draw crowds. He took inspiration from something he'd seen elsewhere in the city: time balls. These were devices used primarily at seaports, where ships' crews needed to accurately set their chronometers for navigation. A large ball would be raised on a pole, and at a precise time, usually noon, it would drop. Ship captains watching from offshore would know the exact moment it happened and could synchronize their clocks accordingly. The concept dated back to 1833, when the Royal Observatory at Greenwich installed a time ball that dropped at 1 p.m. daily. Time balls spread around the world. There were about 150 of them at various ports and observatories. New York had one on the Western Union Building in the financial district, and Ochs would have been familiar with it. Ochs hired an immigrant metalworker named Jacob Starr to build a large illuminated ball that could be lowered from the flagpole on top of one Times Square.
The first ball was 5 feet in diameter, made of iron and wood, and decorated with 100 incandescent light bulbs. It weighed 700 pounds. On December 31, 1907, at exactly midnight, the ball began its descent. It took 60 seconds to travel down the 77-foot flagpole, reaching the bottom precisely as the new year, 1908, began. When it hit bottom, it completed an electrical circuit that lit up enormous 1908 signs on the building's sides and set off a fireworks display. The crowd went wild. Newspapers reported, probably with some exaggeration, that the roar could be heard as far north as Yonkers, more than 10 miles away. Broken noisemakers, confetti, and damaged hats littered the square afterward. It was a complete success. To promote the event, restaurants and hotels near Times Square had provided their waiters with special top hats equipped with battery-powered lights spelling 1908. At midnight, all the waiters simultaneously switched on their hats, adding to the spectacle. Imagine looking around and seeing hundreds of glowing 1908 hats lighting up in the crowd. The ball drop has happened every year since, with only 2 exceptions, 1942 and 1943, during World War II. New York City had instituted dim-outs, similar to the blackouts used in Europe, because there was fear that German submarines might use shore lights to target ships or even shell the city itself. So those 2 years, the ball didn't drop. Instead, crowds still gathered in Times Square, observed a minute of silence as midnight struck, and then listened to the sound of chimes broadcast from sound trucks. From 1944, the ball has dropped every single year without interruption. It's been updated 7 times over the decades, each version reflecting the technology of its era. The original wooden and iron ball with incandescent bulbs lasted until 1920. Then came a 400-pound iron ball. In 1955, an aluminum ball that weighed only 150 pounds, making it easier to control. In 1981, for 7 years, the ball was temporarily transformed into a red apple with a green stem for the I Love New York campaign. In 1995, it went back to being a sphere. In 2000, for the new millennium, a huge new ball was built, 1,070 pounds, covered with Waterford crystal triangles. The current ball, called the Constellation Ball, unveiled in 2025, is the largest yet. It's 12.5 feet in diameter and weighs 12,350 pounds. It's covered with over 5,000 crystals and contains 32,256 LED lights that can create billions of color combinations. It's not just a ball anymore, it's a self-contained light show. The ball stays on top of Times Square year-round now, a permanent installation visible to anyone who looks up in Times Square. It's become not just a New Year's tradition, but an icon of the city itself. Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve, which first broadcast from Times Square in 1972, helped spread the ball drop to the entire nation. Clark, a famous radio DJ and host of American Bandstand, brought cameras into the crowd, mixed in musical performances, and made the ball drop the centerpiece of a whole evening of entertainment. The show made Times Square's moment accessible to anyone with a television, turning a local New York tradition into a national and eventually international ritual. Today, about 1 million people crowd into Times Square on New Year's Eve to watch in person, despite the cold, despite standing for hours, despite the lack of bathrooms or easy exits, and over 1 billion more watch on television or online. It's become the synchronized moment where much of the world pauses together. And it all started because one newspaper owner needed an alternative to fireworks and remembered seeing time balls at the harbor. These modern traditions, resolutions, songs, ball drops, feel permanent and ancient when you're in the middle of them, but they're actually quite recent, cobbled together from various influences, popularized through media, and now maintained through sheer repetition and collective participation. They're meaningful not because they're old, but because we've agreed they're meaningful. That's the power of tradition. It's not about age or authenticity, it's about shared experience and collective memory.
As we approach the end of our journey through New Year's history, it's worth pausing to reflect on what all this means. Not just the facts and dates and traditions, but the emotional reality of why humans care so much about marking this arbitrary point in time's endless flow. The new year is, in many ways, a collective fiction. There's no cosmic reset button that gets pressed at midnight on January 1st. The universe doesn't restart. Time doesn't pause. You're not actually any different at 12:01 a.m. than you were at 11:59 p.m. the night before. And yet, it feels different. We've all agreed that it's different, and so it is. This is one of humanity's great powers. We can create meaning through consensus. We can decide that this moment matters, and then, because we all believe it matters, it actually does. Think about what the new year represents psychologically. It's a clean slate, a fresh start. All year long, we accumulate failures, regrets, bad habits, broken promises. We fall short of who we want to be. We make mistakes. We disappoint ourselves and others. The weight of this accumulates like dust, like clutter, like the slow accretion of imperfection. And then comes December 31st, and we get to press reset. Not really, of course. Our actual lives continue unchanged. Our problems don't magically disappear. Our habits don't automatically transform. But psychologically, symbolically, we get a break. We get to say, that was last year. This year will be different. It's a form of hope, isn't it? The new year is an annually recurring moment of optimism. No matter how badly the previous year went, no matter how many times we failed at our resolutions, no matter how much went wrong, we get another chance. The calendar turns over and possibility opens up again. There's something deeply humane about this. We need fresh starts. We need moments when we can set down the burden of the past and imagine a different future. Even if we end up carrying those same burdens forward, even if we never actually change, the moment of believing we might change is valuable in itself. The new year also gives us permission to reflect. Our lives move so fast usually. We're caught up in the day-to-day, in responding to emails and meeting deadlines and handling crises and maintaining relationships and just getting through the week. We rarely stop and think, how am I doing? Where am I going? Is this the life I want to be living? But at the end of December, there's a cultural expectation that we'll do exactly that. We'll look back at the year that's ending. We'll take stock. We'll notice what happened, what changed, what we lost, what we gained. We'll think about time passing, about our own mortality, about the fact that we have a finite number of new years ahead of us. This can be melancholy. The new year is bittersweet by nature. You're celebrating what's coming, but you're also mourning what's going. That's why Auld Lang Syne fits so perfectly. It captures that complex emotional mix of joy and sadness, hope and nostalgia, looking forward and looking back. The new year is also fundamentally communal. Yes, you can celebrate alone, but most New Year traditions involve gathering, whether that's a small family dinner or 1 million people in Times Square or a virtual gathering online. We mark this moment together. There's something powerful about synchronized collective experience. When the clock strikes midnight, everyone is sharing that exact same moment. All across the world, in different time zones, people are counting down, crossing that threshold from one year to the next together. It creates a feeling of connection, of being part of something larger than yourself. In an increasingly individualized world, where we're all moving at our own pace, on our own schedules, pursuing our own goals, the new year is one of the few moments when we all pause together. It's a shared human rhythm, like a giant global heartbeat. And there's comfort in that rhythm, in that predictability. No matter what else happens, no matter how chaotic life gets, the new year will come. The calendar will turn over, the cycle will continue. There's stability in that, even as everything else changes.
The traditions we've talked about, whether they're ancient like the Babylonian Akitu or recent like the Times Square ball drop, serve to make this abstract moment concrete. They give us something to do with our hands, something to focus on, something to participate in. They transform the conceptual into the experiential. When you're eating 12 grapes in 12 seconds, you're not thinking about the philosophical nature of time. You're focused on chewing and swallowing and not choking. When you're shouting a countdown in Times Square, you're not pondering existential questions about mortality and meaning. You're yelling 3, 2, 1 with a million strangers. And that's good. That's healthy. Too much introspection can be paralyzing. Sometimes you just need to do something, to participate in a ritual, to lose yourself in a collective moment and let the meaning take care of itself. But after the moment passes, after the grapes are eaten and the countdown is over and the ball has dropped and the champagne is drunk, there's often a strange, quiet sense of anticlimax. The new year has arrived, and it turns out it feels pretty much like the old year. You wake up on January 1st with the same life you had on December 31st. The magic wears off quickly. This too is part of the tradition, though we talk about it less. The new year is as much about disappointment as it is about hope. Every year we hope this time will be different. Every year, mostly, it's not. And yet we keep doing it. We keep making resolutions we won't keep. We keep believing this year will be better. We keep gathering to watch a ball drop, to eat grapes, to count down together. Maybe that persistent hope in the face of repeated disappointment is the most human thing about the new year. We know, rationally, that the date changing doesn't actually change anything, but we choose to believe it might anyway. We choose hope over cynicism. We choose to try again. The history of New Year is the history of humanity trying to find meaning in time, trying to mark our passage through it, trying to create moments of significance in an otherwise indifferent universe. It's us saying, this matters, we matter, our lives have rhythm and meaning and purpose, even if we have to create that meaning ourselves. From the Babylonians marking spring planting 4,000 years ago to people in Times Square watching a crystal ball descend today, humans have been doing the same thing, gathering together to acknowledge that time is passing, that seasons turn, that we're all traveling together through this strange experience of being alive. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the simple act of pausing, reflecting, hoping, and beginning again, even if we fail, even if nothing really changes, maybe that's the point. The new year is humanity's at its most optimistic and most delusional, most reflective and most forward-looking, most individual and most collective. It's us at our most human.
So here we are, at the end of our journey through New Year's history. We've traveled from ancient Babylon to modern Times Square. We've seen how humans have marked time across millennia, how they've tried to capture and celebrate the moment when one cycle ends and another begins. We've explored calendars and rituals, celebrations and symbols, ancient mysteries and modern spectacles. What have we learned? That the new year is old and new at once, that it's both universal and endlessly diverse, that it's been January 1st for some and March 25th for others, spring for some and winter for others, solemn for some and celebratory for others, that there's no one right way to mark the turning of the year, no single tradition that's more authentic or more meaningful than any other. There's just humans everywhere, trying to make sense of time's passage, trying to find rhythm in chaos, trying to mark their journey through existence. The calendar, in the end, is just a tool, a human invention to help us coordinate with each other, to plan and prepare, to remember and anticipate. It has no magic power. January 1st is just another day. But we've imbued it with meaning. We've decided it matters. And so it does. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can carry with you this sense of being part of a vast human tradition stretching back thousands of years. The Babylonians watching the spring moon, the Egyptians watching for Sirius, the Romans celebrating Janus, the medieval Christians trying to fix their confused calendars, the Spanish eating their 12 grapes, the crowds in Times Square counting down together. You're part of that same story. Your New Year's celebrations, whatever they look like, connect you to all of human history, to everyone who's ever paused at year's end and thought, time is passing, I am alive, this moment matters. Time flows quietly, like water. Sometimes we notice it, sometimes we don't. But every so often we stop and mark it, acknowledging its passage, honoring its rhythm, hoping that the cycle ahead will be kind to us. The calendar turns, the seasons progress, the years pass, and we continue, as humans always have, marking time, creating meaning, finding ways to celebrate the simple fact that we're here, we're alive, we're traveling together through the endless flow of moments that make up our lives. May your next new year, whenever you choose to celebrate it, bring you joy and peace and hope. May you find meaning in its passing and courage in its possibilities. And may you always remember that time, while it moves steadily onward, is ultimately what we make of it. Rest now. Let the history settle around you like snow. The year turns, the seasons change, and life continues, as humans always have, marking time, creating meaning, finding ways to celebrate the simple fact that we're here, we're alive, we're traveling together through the endless flow of moments that make up our lives.